The Wicklow Military Road, built over 200 years ago by the British to get the rebels of the 1798 rebellion out of these hills. As a history graduate, I've always been fascinated by the human stories behind the facts, and the story of the man behind the military road goes a lot further than the road itself. This really is a great Irish journey. When you think about it, a rebel who started his life in the wilds of West Wicklow and ended up here on the shores of Sydney, Australia. That rebel was Michael Dwyer, a hero of the 1798 rebellion who was credited with inventing guerrilla warfare and was a big influence on Michael Collins.
Well, Dwyer was the single most successful guerrilla fighter of his generation. He remained on the run for 5 years with a coherent and cohesive force.
The story of Dwyer's life features a cast of characters, including Captain Bligh of Mutiny and the Bounty fame, who was determined the Wicklow hero would never succeed as a free man here in Sydney. 3 things I want to find out. Who was Michael Dwyer? Why did the British spend 9 years building a road into his own back garden to get him? And why has Irish history forgotten him? About 15 miles further down the military road, you come to Luggalaw, an old Anglo-Irish hunting lodge. This place is like a scene from Lord of the Rings. It's absolutely beautiful. Today it's owned by Guinness heir Garth Brown, but when the military road was being built, it was owned by the Latouche family. Historian and archaeologist Chris Corlett is here to meet me and to tell me more. It is just absolutely stunning. It is something, it's like something out of a movie.
Yeah, it's one of the most stunning places in the country, actually, and so little known.
Yes.
It really is an amazing place. But yeah, Luggalaw, the house here was built by Peter Latouche, who was a banker and very influential in politics. Of course, bankers were back then, and maybe they are still. And the house, in fact, was only 10 years old, thereabouts, when the 1798 rebellion broke out.
As I'm going along this military road, and we're coming into estates like this one, and getting to know maybe the gentry of the time, I'm beginning to think, moving away from the term military road as opposed to people contacting each other, look, I'll throw you a couple of bob now if you could bring the road my way.
Well, Peter Latouche certainly, you know, he managed to persuade Cornwallis to spend money, in fact, quite a substantial amount on building a bridge here, and really opened up this whole road then, where there was just a boreen before, now became a formal road. And you could see the same all along here, any little valley where it was possible to give access to the wider area, and where it really helped bring up, I suppose you could say, also the value of some of the gentry's land as well. After Latouche owned the house, it went on to the Paris courts and then ultimately ended up in the Guinness family, and today Garrick Brown owns and lives at Luggalaw. And everybody from our own chieftains to Seamus Heaney to Mick Jagger and Michael Jackson have stayed here.
Just to get away from the world. And it's just when you look around, the lake down there, the trees, the wild deer, like you're just a million miles away from everything.
Absolutely, and probably less than 25 miles from the GPO in O'Connell Street in Dublin.
Luggalaw is a far cry from Michael Dwyer's life on the run, but the 1798 rebellion remains a big part of this landscape. Especially here at Glendalough, the military road's most famous landmark. And Chris is about to show me a fascinating piece of that history here in this graveyard.
So here, I just want to show you this stone here. Glendalough was a very important burial place from very early times, but in the 18th century it was still a very, very important burial place. And here we have an example of a very fine headstone that was carved in the 18th century by a guy called Dennis Cullen out of Wexford, from North Wexford. And he had a particular style which is very distinctive. And here we can see it. It shows the crucifixion of Christ, but rather than Roman centurions that you'd expect to see, here we've got a man on horseback who's all dressed in 18th century clothing. We've got a man holding a pike here who's obviously a military man as well. And these are straight out of the 18th century. So the baddies in the 18th century crucifixion scene are not Roman centurions at all. They're actually the military men of the day.
And British?
British,
Irish?
yeah. Well, they're possibly Irish stock, I suppose, but they're conscripted, well, they're in the yeomanry of the local gentry and the army and so on. So they're possibly Irish, all right, but they're representing the British Army.
But Glendalough has another association with Michael Dwyer in 1798. It turns out there wasn't anything that fella didn't know about the place, so we're heading across the lake to find out more.
Okay guys, where we're going to go is up the slab by the ropes and then in around to the left. There is steps cut in, so it is totally safe. You have helmet on, harness on, clip to the rope. If you slip at all, it'll just be the stretch in the rope that you'll feel. You won't go anywhere.
Okay. But I'm a bit concerned about what he has in store for me. I thought I was supposed to be investigating a road, not climbing up a cliff face. But it's worth the climb, because this is St. Kevin's Bed, the resting place of the famous 6th century saint. But it looks like Michael Dwyer made it up here too.
Well, Michael Dwyer is supposed to have had lots of hiding places around the Wicklow Mountains, and this was supposed to be one of them. Now, this is a story that was recorded in the newspapers really 30 years or more after the event, so you have to take it with a good measure of salt.
Yeah.
But the story goes that Michael Dwyer was here, and a troop of Highland soldiers found out that he was hiding here, and they were camped across on the other side of the lake, and they tried to take pot shots at him. Michael Dwyer had no choice really but to try and have a go for it, and he decided to go straight up the mountainside here. And the soldiers then decided to drop their guns and took their bayonets and went around the mountains to try and meet him coming up to the top of the cliff.
Yeah.
But the wily old fox that he was spotted this and then decided to backtrack and came back down the cave, swam across the lake to where the soldiers had been, picked up all their guns and ammunition and ran off Glen of Amal.
Chris, I don't know about you, but that seems a bit far-fetched to me.
It is a bit far-fetched, isn't it? You know, there was all this myth and legend around Michael Dwyer, and cultivated while he was hiding in the mountains, really. You know, that's what made it so difficult to catch him, and it was all this myth and legend that made him so famous.
Chris is right, and reading about Dwyer, you can see how much legend is attached to him. Imagine Michael Dwyer on the run, cold and starving in the hills of Wicklow for 5 years. The British building a military road just to catch him, and Dwyer outwitting them all to leave this wonderful legacy behind here for Irish Australians and his descendants.